There are very strong threats from the Israeli cabinet, particularly from the right of the Israeli cabinet, to annex the West Bank. That would effectively end any chance of a Palestinian state. The future of Gaza itself is in obviously huge doubt.
Labour's Heidi Alexander told us the government had timed its decision to move forward on recognising a Palestinian state for maximum impact. Things do seem to be moving. In the UN, several Arab countries, including Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, have for the first time told Hamas to disband. They joined 14 other countries, including Britain and France, in signing a statement that also condemned the October the 7th terror attacks and told Hamas to give up power. The French Foreign Secretary said it was a historic and unprecedented move. We're joining us now, Richard Spencer, the Times foreign correspondent. Richard, good morning.
Good morning.
Can we start with this new declaration then from several Arab countries, as well as Britain and France, to tell Hamas to disband? How significant a moment is this?
I think what this is about is Britain and France taking part in this UN conference on the future of the Palestinian crisis, the conflict, and what might come after. Particularly, it's an attempt to ensure that this idea of a two-state solution survives. I think that's what underlies both the French and the British position at the moment, beyond the pictures of Gaza and the terrible humanitarian catastrophe there, which is like the sort of immediate trigger for them taking action. More importantly, in the long run, I'm not saying more importantly than people dying, obviously, but in the long run of things, people who look at these things, diplomats and politicians, are seeing the chances of a two-state solution disappear. There are very strong threats from the Israeli cabinet, particularly from the right of the Israeli cabinet, to annex the West Bank. That would effectively end any chance of a Palestinian state. The future of Gaza itself is in obviously huge doubt. So all these countries, which have a historic position in favor of the two-state solution, have come together to make this joint statement. The issue of Hamas giving up arms is inherent in that, because you cannot have a armed group that will presumably not be allowed to be the government of a Palestinian state by anyone, certainly not by Israel. The idea is you cannot allow a separate armed force, because then any government of a Palestinian unitary state won't have power over its full and untrammeled security power, which is necessary for a state to function properly. We've seen what happens in Lebanon when a particular group, in this case Hezbollah, are allowed to keep onto its weapons, or before then the Palestine Liberation Organization. So this is all of an attempt to keep the two-state solution going. In the Arab states context, they have all signed up to a thing called the Arab Peace Initiative, which Saudi Arabia proposed back in the early 2000s. And that is how they see the long-term solution to this crisis. So it's an attempt to keep this on the agenda when it's under such threat.
Can the UK's move to recognise a Palestinian state, how does that fit in? Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, told us about an hour ago that they were doing it at the time that would create the most maximum impact. Is that right?
I mean, I think there are two or three things here. I mean, there is, it seems to me, some element of a Keir Starmer climb down here. He said only the other day that he wouldn't join France in recognising a state. So I think he's come under a lot of pressure. But as I say, there's the trigger aspect. You know, the Gaza thing has, the Gaza conflict and the famine in Gaza has put this in everyone's mind's eye. There is clearly a lot of public interest in this issue and public pressure for governments beyond those in the region and beyond America, which is, Israel's main backer, to act, including on France and Britain, which are veto-holding permanent members of the Security Council. There's a broader geopolitical pressure where a cause that is quite popular around the world, namely standing up for Palestinians in the face of their war with Israel, whatever we think the rights and wrongs are. The Western position is unpopular around the world, and Russia and China, which have backed the Palestinians, are gaining a lot of diplomatic plaudits in Asia, in Africa, in other places where we want to keep influence. So there is that. But I say on what's happening on the ground, Israel is moving very fast towards making a two-state solution impossible. And as I say, ministers are openly saying we want to annex the West Bank, and that is curtains for the two-state solution.
Yeah.
And they're doing it without any longer-term plan for what happens to the Palestinian people under that. So that is the other reason why these countries are acting now.
What does it mean to define Palestine as a state? What difference does it make if it's recognised, and what would they actually be recognising?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and there are many different levels to answer that question. I mean, obviously, in some senses, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, it's not going to end the war. It's not going to mean that Palestine gets to rule itself. Israel isn't going to withdraw from the West Bank or Gaza just because Britain and France recognize the Palestinian state. Looking at it from the same thing from the other perspective, is the state can exist in people's minds and in its own self-estimation without other countries recognizing it. It doesn't need to have even a member state seat of the United Nations Security Council. Switzerland only joined the United Nations in 2002. No one denied it was a state before that. There are one or two practical consequences for this, however. So one is that if Britain recognizes Palestine as a state, then it becomes, in Britain's view, a state. So it gets an embassy. At the moment, its representatives are called the Palestinian Mission. That has a certain moral force. It means that Britain will back Palestinian membership of various international organizations that require, statehood to be a member. It means more diplomatic backing from Britain around the world for the Palestinian cause, I think. There's a second question of what happens to the United Nations. Now, America will still continue to veto Palestine's full membership of the United Nations. It's an observer state at the moment. If it became a member state, if America also dropped that veto, and it's now looking a lonely veto, there are 5 veto-holding members, and America is now the last one not to recognize Israel if Britain and France go ahead with this. But if America dropped that veto and Palestine became a member state, it becomes a full state in the UN terms. It can vote, it can submit motions, it can sit on the Security Council in the rotation of non-permanent members. It can sit on in full terms on international bodies. That's significant. Of course, at the moment, the United States will continue to veto that.
Richard, thank you so much for the explanation. Richard Spencer, the Times foreign correspondent.
Well, fascinating insight into what all of this means, and indeed doesn't mean as well. What won't emerge from this? I think that part there about there being an embassy. If the UK recognises a Palestinian state, then they would get an embassy. That's quite a striking demonstration of the significance of what Sir Keir Starmer is announcing, or looking to announce at the UN in September. Albeit assuming the conditions that he has set out are not met. There's a lot of bandwidth, as Amanda puts it on text, being spent on the Israel-Palestine issue. Amanda says, when there are so many serious domestic issues, she says we can do nothing about the Middle East. Starmer is wasting so much time on this issue precisely because he's clueless on domestic policy and desperate to retain votes. I want our country fixing, says Amanda. It's certainly dominated the conversation today, hasn't it? And the feeling is that as an internal political issue for the Labour government, that this seems to have been dominating conversation actually for several weeks, and there's been split and pressure and difficulty for the Prime Minister in juggling the desires of many of his cabinet ministers.
Yeah, John asked the question. The UK government says it will recognise a Palestinian state if Israel does not comply with certain conditions. What if Israel does comply? No recognition of Palestine? What's the point? Please, can you explain? And does it suggest that the motivations of the UK government are actually to apply pressure on Israel more than anything else?